Welcome back, everyone. With the recent news that Russia is attacking Ukraine, how would it impact the economy in a global and US level? Are we entering now in a World War III? We are going to have commentary or feedback on how did it all started. But I would like to welcome, again, I'm Christopher, CEO and founder of YCO Tax, a virtual tax and bookkeeping service solution in the US that I will be co-hosted no other than a certified accounting and finance professional with 4 years of working experience with KPMG, Obaid. How are you, Obaid?
I'm good. How are you, Chris?
I'm good, and hopefully, we let's get to know more. How did it all started this crisis, and what will be the future in the U.S. economy?
Yeah, let's find out.
You've heard numerous answers to this question. In Ukraine, 71% of the people believe their country is already at war with Russia. This is a complex crisis, and all the answers are hidden in history. Did you know there was a time when Kiev was more powerful than Moscow? There was also a time when Ukraine and America were adversaries. Tonight, we'll bring you all these stories. We will tell you why Russian President Vladimir Putin is obsessed with Ukraine. I'm Palki Sharma Upadhyay, this is Gravitas Plus. We begin in the 9th century. There was a state called Kievan Rus. This is where it was located. The Slavic people lived here. The city of Kiev was their capital. Between 980 and 1015, the Kievan Rus was ruled by Grand Prince Volodymyr. In Russian, his name is Vladimir. In Ukrainian, Volodymyr. And as fate would have it, these are also the names of the presidents of these two countries today.
Oh, so this is
Anyway, Russians,
inherited.
Ukrainians, and Belarusians draw their lineage from this Slavic state. A lot changed in the centuries that followed, and for a lot of it, Ukraine was under Russian rule. In the 1900s, the two were Soviet republics. Russia, the most powerful of the 15 republics, and Ukraine, the second most powerful. It had defense industries, large agricultural lands, and housed much of the Soviet nuclear arsenal. During the Cold War, Ukraine was the arch rival of the United States. The Soviet Union collapsed in 1991. Ukraine became independent, as did Russia. Ukraine inherited much of Soviet nuclear arsenal, but gave it up to Russia in 1994. In exchange, Moscow guaranteed Ukraine's security and promised to respect its sovereignty. They signed the Budapest Memorandum along with these countries. Cut to November 2013, Viktor Yanukovych was the president of Ukraine. He had a reputation for heavy-handedness, corruption, and above all, for being openly pro-Moscow. In 2013, he rejected an EU trade deal. This deal could have meant greater integration with the European Union. Instead, Yanukovych decided to take a $15 billion bailout from Russia. To many Ukrainians, it felt like being sold to Moscow, so protests broke out. They were called Euromaidan. Euro because these protests were about Europe, and Maidan because they happened in Kiev's Maidan, what we today know as the Independence Square. Here, protesters chanted, "Sign the EU deal, Yanukovych must step down." Russia supported the president, the West supported the protesters. In February 2014, Yanukovych's government was toppled, the president was driven out of Ukraine, he fled to Russia. Not every Ukrainian was happy with this.
I think this kind of the leadership started the conflict on the division, right, between the Russia and the
Yeah, exactly.
Ukraine.
Exactly. I mean, they were both part of the Soviets before, but then the conflict started to rise again between these two
Yes, and because of
countries.
that deal, the EU that he did not sign that in favor of Russia. That's where the conflict began.
Exactly. Exactly.
Okay, wow, it's good to know. I never encountered this in my world history until now.
Hmm.
Many in the Russian-speaking East wanted Yanukovych to stay. When he was driven out, the minority felt disenfranchised. On the other side of the border, Russia was angry it had lost its puppet. To salvage the situation, Moscow annexed Crimea. Why Crimea? Well, let's now zoom into this part of the world. Crimea is a peninsula. It is located in the Black Sea. In 1954, Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev transferred Crimea. It was given to the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic from the Russian Soviet Socialist Republic.
This is very similar to what is happening in the Philippines. That there's a island. This Crimea is now from Russia. It was given to Ukraine. The Philippines also have the same issue from this Spratly Island that is now territorialized by China, which it's just history repeats itself. You know what it tells me? It's more like like in school that there are big bullies versus small kids, and I feel like Russia is one of the biggest bully, and he's trying to empower Ukraine.
Yeah, it's basically getting that power again, the superpower status by Russia.
Yes, and if they lose the control because they lost the puppet, the guy that been thrown out, they now started to try to get the bigger piece of the pie, starting with Crimea. And usually, islands like this, they are really have bountiful resources from the oil, gas, agriculture, you name it. So that's why Russia is really aggressive of taking Crimea from Ukraine.
That's true. Yeah.
Khrushchev hoped the transfer would strengthen quote unquote brotherly ties between the Ukrainian and Russian people. Both Russia and Crimea were part of the Soviet Union. So this transfer did not mean very much. When Ukraine became independent in 1991, Crimea joined it. The peninsula was given special autonomy. It remained home to Russian military bases. Moscow promised to respect Crimean autonomy. Many in Russia were of the opinion that Crimea should not have been allowed to join Ukraine. In 2014, when Yanukovych was ousted from power in Ukraine, Russian military began seizing government.
And this is also like a conflict of interest, and I do feel that there is something going on, because can you imagine, like, Crimea is part of Ukraine. It was given to Ukraine, and now Russia has a military base. Do you think there's something fishy going on on that kind of strategy?
But it was given back when they both were part of the Soviets, the both main leaders of the Soviets. Uh, Back then, it didn't have any much of a significance in regarding that conflict to rise.
Yeah, right now, because I'm Filipino, the same thing. The Philippines has given sovereignty and then have our own government, but still there are military bases of the U.S.
Yeah, exactly.
Now.
I mean,
Mhm.
Ukraine never had that liberty of having a sovereign or an independent country. Only in the two instances they had.
Do you think why do you have they have military bases there? Because of the army needs the Ukraine still needs the army of Russia, like in Crimea, right? I think Crimea is still in a good defense if they have Russia's military.
No,
That's what. Mhm.
what what I have to my viewpoint regarding this situation is like Russia wants to not Russia doesn't want Ukraine to be a part of NATO or be a part of the European Union for for that case, because they want to have them, because what Putin is saying is that Ukraine was actually the part of Russia and it should not be the part of NATO in any
Yeah, I mean
case.
the NATO, because in other words, it's like they are brothers that living together in the same house, and then they decided to separate. And then at this point, that Ukraine is this year is planning to become a part of NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, that will give them more allies and defense. That's why Russia don't want that to happen, because at this point, Ukraine's not part of NATO, so they don't get that support yet for defense. So they're taking advantage of the situation to overpower and to intimidate Ukraine.
Yeah,
That's how I
exactly.
see it, correct? Hmm.
Hmm.
And then they're right now it's all started with who controls what, the Crimea, who owns it, and this is where another conflict happened way back in 2014.
Yeah,
Buildings in
that's true.
Crimea. Soon the entire peninsula was under military occupation. A referendum followed. On the 16th of March 2014, Crimeans voted to become a part of Russia. Was this vote legitimate? Well, it depends on who you ask. For Putin, this was Crimea's liberation. For the rest of the world, this was Crimea's annexation. The focus then shifted to eastern Ukraine, where Russia backed separatists had seized territory. Ukrainian forces did not launch an all out offensive at first, but on the 17th of July 2014, when a flight carrying 298 people was shot down by these rebels, Ukrainian forces decided to flush out the rebels. The separatists began losing ground, so the Russian army stepped in. They invaded eastern Ukraine and fought alongside the rebels. What followed was a series of talks between Russia, Ukraine, and the West. They resulted in the Minsk Accords. This was first signed in 2014. Both sides agreed on ceasefire and military withdrawal. Ukraine agreed to hold elections in the rebel-held areas. 8 years on, the Minsk Accords remain unimplemented. Ukraine stands as the largest European country excluding Russia. It covers an area of more than 600,000 square.
I didn't know that the Ukraine is bigger than Russia until now.
I mean,
Did you know that?
it's a
Mhm.
su- it's it's the one of the largest country in the Europe
Oh, okay.
after it. Yeah.
Square kilometers with a population of 44 million and a GDP of more than $155 billion. Per capita income more than $3,700. Today, Ukraine is divided between East and West in more ways than one. The West sees itself as more European, the East is closer to Russia, be it in terms of geography or sentiment. In the West, most Ukrainians speak Ukrainian. In the East, a third are native Russians. In the West, Russia is looked at with suspicion. In the East, Russia is looked at through the lens of shared history and heritage. Ukraine also remains at war. Its forces are fighting the rebels in the east. Rebel leaders are ruling at least two regions, Donetsk and Luhansk. Together, they're known as the Donbas region. Russia has once again sent its troops.
So even Ukraine has their own internal conflict.
Yeah. The East and the West.
Yes, and Russia is adding up to this. And let's see how the Ukraine will be divided or united on the crisis at this point,
I
because
I
they
guess
will be invaded,
Russia
right?
is Russia is benefiting between those rivalry in Ukraine itself.
Exactly, because it's just with there's so many divisions, they are getting weaker if they're not gonna be united, and Russia knows that. They're just waiting for that right opportunity.
This time, they're stationed right at the border. What does Vladimir Putin want? For NATO to stop expanding. NATO stands for North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It's a military alliance. These countries are the founding members of NATO. These countries joined it during the Cold War, and these countries joined after it. Ukraine wants to join NATO too, but Putin wants NATO to exclude Ukraine and every former Soviet state. And this is just half the story. Like I said, a lot is hidden in history. For starters, there is domestic politics. When Putin annexed Crimea, his approval rating skyrocketed. Keeping the nationalistic drum rolling helps the Russian president. Annexing parts of Ukraine also helps Putin restore Russia's superpower image. Again, back to history. Many Russians view Ukraine's independence as a mistake. It is true that Ukraine was ruled by Russia. In fact, Ukraine has barely remained independent pre 1991. There was a brief period before World War I and then another stint in 1600. For the rest of its modern history, Ukraine was under Russia. 1 in 6 Ukrainians is an ethnic Russian. 1 in 3 speaks Russian as a native language. So Putin is right when he says historically they were one. But claiming Ukraine on the basis of colonial history is wrong. It will be like Britain claiming India, or South Africa, or Spain claiming the Philippines.
Mm-hmm.
Past imperialism cannot justify present day expansionism. Here's what else history tells us Ukraine was forcefully Russified.
Like Philippines has been invaded since for the past 300 years, from 1525, I believe, until 1896, until American came to the rescue.
That
Cut to
that's
17.
the point.
Right, and this is Russia is a modern imperialism.
Hmm.
1800, Russian leader Catherine the Great started Russifying Ukraine. Ethnic Russians were shipped to this part of the world. Schools were told to teach Russian language. By 1800, the Ukrainian language was banned. In 1930, Soviet leader Joseph Stalin steered a famine in Ukraine. Millions of Eastern Ukrainians were killed. The area was then
Wow.
repopulated with ethnic Russians. In the 1940s, the ethnic Tatars were relocated. They too were replaced with Russians. There is a reason why Eastern Ukraine today has so many native Russian speakers. It was designed to be that way. Eastern Ukraine was always dear to Russia. It has coal, it has iron, fertile land. Its historical connection with Russia was forced. Putin, time and again, talks about the Holy Rus. He said,
Exactly, and that's the reason why this all the resources of Ukrainian or the Ukraine that have this oil, natural gas, these are the things that going to inflate in the US. The prices will going to spike as we
Yeah,
already have this inflation already.
exactly. I mean, it's gonna impact the prices all over the world since the prices are already rising all over the world,
But
and since Russia is the third largest exporter of the oil, so I believe it's gonna impact a lot on the international prices for
but
oil and oil-related products. Yes.
on this video, they cannot intervene because they're not part of NATO. United States cannot do anything just to go to Germany, correct?
Yeah, unless there is intervention by any other country.
And that's why their hands are tied. They cannot intervene, and the reason that Russia is taking advantage more of that, it's because of this situation
Hmm.
that they can that Ukraine is not as strong in terms of the defense,
Yeah, that's
considering there
true.
are divisions inside Ukraine.
Yeah.
Russians and Ukrainians are one people. 70% Ukrainians reject this thought. 72% consider Russia a hostile state. Today, 33.3% Ukrainians are ready to take up arms against Russia. 21.7% are ready to stage a civil resistance against Russia. 67% Ukrainians want to join the EU. 59% want to join the NATO. Meet the current Ukrainian president, Volodymyr Zielinski. He gained power in 2019 following a landslide victory. He's a vocal critic of Russia. Zelensky openly opposes Russian occupation of eastern Ukraine.
Mhm.
73% of Ukrainian voters voted this man to power. Today, Volodymyr Zelensky represents the pulse of Ukraine, the Ukraine that wants to remain independent of Russia. But Vladimir Putin wants to become the man who revived Russian imperialism. He does not realize the world has moved on.
There you go. What are your thoughts about this in the global or US economy with this chaos?
I mean, it's really gonna kick in the inflation more aggressively in the markets of international countries. It's gonna inflate the prices for oil. It's gonna inflate the prices of the oil-related products, and even in the grocery, it's gonna impact a lot of things in
Yeah,
the
where I
grocery.
actually this year was the all-time high for the past 40 years that our inflation rate went up, I think up to 13%. That's the all-time high for the past 40 years. And now we have this war that could be just it's just a light that becomes a wildfire. It's just a small light that it begins, because I feel like there are more other countries that going to be involved, like even China. It is something, I feel like China is having this kind of conspiracy with Russia, because we've seen that they also want to get Taiwan because of the resources of Taiwan. So they're trying to get that kind of attention that Russia and Ukraine, but then again, China is doing something else.
Yeah, probably China would be actually having a close eye to this conflict, and since the West is actually more concerned about this conflict between Ukraine and Russia, they would be busy doing talks and checking into the stuff for this conflict and determining how they can actually mitigate the impacts of this war. And China would be maybe they would be actually uh, cooking something else
Right.
behind. Yeah.
Yeah, it's always something like we have right now at the COVID situation. We're just barely recovering, and now we have this. So let's see what's going to happen in our businesses, for small businesses out there. Just brace for the impact, and let's just hope that this doesn't escalate and gets even worse. All right. Okay, Obid, thank you very much. Thank you guys. I hope what do you think? What are your thoughts? Are we heading to the World War III? What are the other impact of this situation in overall? So let us know, comment below again. Thank you for watching and have a good day. Thank you, Obid.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Bye bye.